Olivia by B.C. Andrews. Spring on the Cape always had a way of surprising me. It was almost as if I never expected it would return. Winters could be long and dreary with days shaved down by sharp edges of night, but I never minded the gray skies and colder winds as much as other people did, especially my younger sister Belinda. For as long as I could remember, our schoolmates believed winter suited me better anyway. I don't recall exactly when or how it started, but one day someone referred to me as Miss Cold and Belinda as Miss Hot. And those labels followed us even to this day. When she was a little girl, Belinda loved to burst out of the house, rush into the open air, catch the wind in her hair, and spin and laugh until she grew dizzy and fell in the sand. Hysterical, excited, her eyes nearly as luminous as 2 birthday candles. Everything she did was an explosion. She never talked slowly, but always spoke as if she had words crushing her lungs and had to get them out before she died. No matter what she did or said, it usually punctuated at the end with her gasping, "I just had to tell you that before I die." By 12, she was walking with a mature woman's swing in her hips. Turning and dipping her shoulders resembled a trained courtesan. She waved her hands about her like fans of a geisha's girl, pretending to hide her flirtatious eyes and beguiling smile between her small fingers. I saw grown men turn their heads and stare until they realized how young she was, and then almost always took a second look just to confirm it, their faces dark with disappointment. Her laughter was contagious. Whoever was around her at the time inevitably broke into a wide smile as though she touched them with a magic wand to drive away the doldrums, their sadness or depression. People, especially boys, became blubbering amnesiacs in her presence, forgetting their responsibilities, their duties, their appointments, and most of all, their own reputations. They would do the silliest things at her beck and call. "You look like a frog, Tommy Carter. Let's hear you croak. Come on," she would taunt. And Tommy Carter, 2 years older, nearly a high school senior, would crouch like a toad and go ribbit, ribbit to a chorus of laughter and applause. A moment later, Belinda was off driving someone else to the precarious edge of sanity and dignity. I always knew that she would get into trouble. I just never realized how deep the pool of disaster would go. I tried to correct her behavior, teach her how to be more of a lady, and most of all, how to tread around boys and men with caution. They were always giving her gifts, and she would accept them, no matter how empathetically I warned her against it. "It creates an obligation," I said. "Give these things back, Belinda. The most dangerous thing you can do is fill a young man's hearts with full of promises." "I don't ask them to give me these things," she protested. "Well, maybe I hint at it, but I don't twist their arms, so I don't owe them a thing. Unless I want to owe them," she would add with a mischievous smile. For some reason, it was left mostly to me to give Belinda the guidance that she so desperately needed. Our mother eschewed the responsibility and obligations. She hated to hear anything nasty or see anything ugly. Her vocabulary was filled with euphemisms, words to hide the dark truths of our world. People didn't die, they went away for good. Daddy was never mean to her. He was just out of spirits. She made it sound as if spirits were something that you could get like you get at a gas station when your tank indicated empty. Whenever any of us were sick, she treated it as if it was our own fault. We caught colds out of carelessness and got bellyaches from eating the wrong foods. It was always a result of a poor choice we made. And if we would just try, it would all go away and everyone would be happy again. "Close your eyes real tight and wish it away. That's what I do," she would say. For me, the worst thing was the way she viewed everything Belinda did. Her failures were never anything more than just a temporary setback. Her pranks and little acts of mischiefs were always due to the youth of her having its way. She'll grow out of it soon. Soon will never come, Mother, I would say with an authority of a clairvoyant. But Mother never listened. She waved the air around her ears as if my words were nothing more than annoying flies. Anytime I complained, I had just risen from the wrong side of bed. Blink and it will all go away. The storms and the sickness. Belinda's bad behavior, Daddy's poor temperament, economic downswings, wars, pestilence, crime, all of it would just go away along with anything else that was the slightest way of being unpleasant. Our mother's room was always filled with flowers. She hated dampness, musty odors. She filled her day with music box tunes and actually wore rose-tinted glasses because she hated the dull colors, the way things faded, the annoying dark clouds that poked their bruised faces in our way. Belinda and I decided it was far more like her than she was like our daddy. Both of us favored Mother's petite build, and it was clear early on that neither of us was ever going to be much more than 5'1" or 2. Mother was 5'1" in her bare feet. Belinda was even smaller than I was, and I would have to admit, had the most perfect face. Her eyes were bluer. Mine were more gray. She had a smaller nose, and her mouth was perfect proportion. Her lips were always set in a soft twist that put a tiny dimple in her left cheek. When she was very little, Daddy would touch it with his finger and pretend it was a button. Belinda was supposed to dance, and dance she did, flamboyant even at ages 2 and 3. Daddy would beam a smile so deep it went right into his heart as she turned and did pariots in the living room, always with her right forefinger pressed at the top of her head. Mother laughed and clapped as any guest would at that time. "Can't Olivia dance too, colonial child?" one of Daddy's close friends once asked. I'd look up and Daddy would stare at me a moment, then shake his head slowly, his eyes intense and firm on my face. "No, Olivia doesn't dance. Olivia thinks," he said with an approving nod. "She plans and organizes. She's my little general." After we were older and Daddy continued to refer me from time to time as his little general, Belinda would tease me by saluting in the hallways or at the dinner table. Then she would laugh and hug me and say, "I'm just fooling you, Olivia. Don't look so hateful." Being serious about yourself and having some self-respect isn't hateful, Belinda. You should try it. "Oh, I can't. My face won't make all those lines in my forehead. My skin just snaps in revolt," she cried, rushing away with her giggles trailing behind her like a ribbon of tails on a kite. She was so frustrating all the time. Why was it that neither my mother nor my father saw what I saw? Our Daddy was rarely displeased by anything Belinda said or did, and it was as if he would get over it so quickly. It was as if it never happened. The moment after he raised his voice to her, he would check himself and seize control of that otherwise wild, fiery temper. Many times I had witnessed his rages and saw him unleash his fury against politicians, government officials, lawyers, and businessmen. I saw him take servants to task so harshly that they left his presence with their eyes down and their heads lowered, their faces pale. He was so biting and sharp with his words, he could skin someone alive with a sentence. However, the moment he chastised Belinda, he began his retreat. I can almost see him reach out and pull the words back in his lips. If her eyes so much as glassed over with tears, he would treat her like she'd been fatally wounded, and at the end he'd buy her something new and promise her something wonderful. It was as if her smiles and laughter made it possible for him to get through the day. Sometimes when we were all together at dinner or after dinner in the sitting room watching television or reading, I would look at Daddy and see him staring at Belinda, his face full of admiration, his eyes feasting on her delicate features the way an art collector might appreciate some rare antiquity, some masterpiece. Why didn't he look at me that way, I wondered mournfully. I had never done anything that made him ashamed or unhappy. I knew he was proud of my accomplishments, but he behaved as if I expected no less. I realized he took me for granted, but I always delivered, whether it was an award at school, compliments from business associates, or accomplishments at home. When I completed finishing school with the highest possible commendation, he kissed me on the forehead and shook my hand. I almost expected him to pin a ribbon on my chest and give me a promotion. My reward was to be given a place of responsibility in the family business until the day when some fine young gentleman would approach Daddy and ask for my hand in marriage. I never understood from what well he drew these buckets of hope and expectation. Daddy simply refused to believe that times were different, that young men look for women with qualities other than fine family and don't behave so formally anymore. It was almost as if he believed he and our family were exempt from the social and political changes that affected everyone else. If he was ever challenged in his beliefs, he would shake his head and say, "It's simply not good business for people to behave badly. There's no profit in it. Whenever you do anything in this life, you should stop and ask yourself, what's the bottom line? If you do that, you'll always make the right choices." That was something he should have taught Belinda, I thought, but he never lectured her. In fact, he rarely gave her any advice. She was permitted to be a free spirit floating through our home and our lives, carefree and spontaneous, unrepentant and forever free of obligation, worry, and responsibility. When I questioned Daddy about her, he would nod his head, giving me the impression that I was right, and then he would stop and say, "You've got to just watch out for her, Olivia." "When did she start having to watch out for herself, Daddy?" "She's a high school senior this year," I retorted. "Some women never become anything more than older girls," he offered. I thought he was just making excuses, and it always put me in fury. Why make excuses for her forever? Why not grab her by the nape of the neck one day and shake her until that silly flirtatious smile fell off that porcelain face and shattered at her feet? Why not make her grow up? Why not force her to face the consequences of her actions? That is maturity, I declared in my imaginary speech, a speech my parents rarely heard, and when they did, paid little heed. "I don't want to grow up," Belinda once said, and had the audacity to confess. "It's boring and unpleasant, and full of scowling and worries. I want to be a little girl for the rest of my life and have men take care of me." "Don't you have any self-respect? Not one iota?" I questioned. She shrugged and softened those eyes, those lips that brought smile to faces of so many. "I will when I need it," she declared. Sometimes talking to her tied my stomach in a knot. I would feel the very muscles in my arms and legs contract into ropes of steel. The frustration threatened to fracture me, and I wanted to reach out and slap some sense into that silly little face. And then she would hug me and say, "You'll have enough respect for both of us, Olivia. I just know you will. I'm so lucky to have you as my older sister." Afterwards, she would rush off to meet her friends and flirt with her throng of male admirers, leaving me to tend whatever chore or duty Daddy had set out for both of us. I must confess that sometimes I would stand there and watch her flirt and wish I was more like her. When she put her head to the pillow at night, it was always filled with candy cane thoughts, whereas mine became Main Street for the parade of worries and review of obligations. Her ears were full of music and promises. Mine were stuffed with facts and appointments. I was Daddy's living diary of events. He could put the tip of his finger on Belinda's dimple and make her smile, the smile that warmed his heart, but he could only point his finger at me and get me to recite the purpose of a business date. It was that he was ungrateful. It wasn't that he was ungrateful. I believed him when he bragged about his little general, but something in me, the Belinda in me, wanted him to mention other things about me too. I know he thought I was more significant and more promising when it came to success for the family, but didn't he ever think of me as being pretty too? Couldn't I be attractive and responsible simultaneously? Unfortunately, I concluded in fear Daddy was like most men, weak when it came to a flirtatious smile, a flighty, silly gesture, a quick hug and a kiss, as if affection were sort of a substitute for responsibility and industry. Something inside me told me that if I wanted men to admire me, I should imitate my sister and let bubbles float around my head and thoughts and ideas. But would I be happier? Most of the men I had met in my life tried to convince me I would, but I was determined not to become some man's toy like my mother had become for my father. Belinda thinks she's happy, but she doesn't understand how little men really do think of her, how small their respect for her is, I concluded. They might crave and desire her, but when they are satisfied, when they had used her, satiated themselves, and discarded her, where would she be but mired with misery, off someplace crying, her lost youth and beauty, hating the world for having such a thing as aging? She would die a little girl. I would die a woman, and I would not be used or abused to satisfy some man. Yes, there was part of me that wanted to be like Belinda, but that was the part men planted in me, the part I could subdue. Call me Little General, call me Miss Cold, call Belinda Miss Hot, I thought. But in the end, they will call me with respect. And really, in the end, what mattered more, respect or love? No one really knew what love was. How many husbands and wives had this so-called magical bond? The choice was simple, I thought. Be a dreamer or be a realist, and make the day conform to what I wanted and not what I hoped. Belinda danced and my father smiled. My mother fled from pain and darkness, and I stood behind them all like an impregnable wall, keeping disaster away from our doorstep. In the end, they would all appreciate me. And what would anyone want more than that? The twinkle of Belinda's laughter fell along the dark corridors of my own doubt, filling my mind with little sparks, keeping me from being absolutely sure. Chapter 1. Cries in the Night. At first I thought I was dreaming, for when I woke and opened my eyes, I heard nothing but the low whistle of the wind blowing up from the ocean. The stream of moonlight filtering through my sheer white curtain bathed the walls in a pale yellow glow. My window shutters banged against the clapboard, and then I heard the sounds again, this time with my eyes wide. I listened, my heart tapping like a steadily growing drumbeat, in anticipation of some important announcement or event. After a moment, I heard it once more. It sounded like a cat in heat, but we had no cats. Daddy hated pets, finding them more of an obligation than a pleasure. The only animals, he said, had any purpose was a watchdog or a seeing-eyed dog. They had no need for either. Our house was far enough away from the downtown Providencetown area and surrounded by walls 10 feet high. And an entrance gate Daddy had Jerome, our groundskeeper, lock every night. Daddy also kept his shotgun under the bed just in case. It was, he said, a lot cheaper than feeding some mongrel, and that, he concluded, was the bottom line. This time the sound was even louder. I sat up so quickly someone would think I had springs under me, but I realized the shrill cries were not my imagination or from nightmares. The noise was coming through the wall between my room and Belinda's. It wasn't a howl exactly, nor was it a screech. There was something familiar about the sound, yet something starkly unusual. It was certainly not a noise Belinda would make herself, but there was no doubt it was emanating from her bedroom. I stepped off my bed, scooped my robe from the chair beside my bed, and shoved my arms into the sleeves, and I left my room. Daddy and Mother had already come out of their bedroom. Mother was still in her nightgown, and Daddy was in his pajamas. The dreadful sound continued. What in the hell? Daddy started for Belinda's closed door. I followed with Mother, a distant third. But when Daddy opened the door and realized a horrendous scream came from Belinda, Mother charged forward. "Winston, what's wrong?" she cried. Daddy flicked on the light, illuminating the most amazing and alarming sight before us. Belinda was sprawled on the floor, her nightgown bloody and crumpled up to her breasts. There, lying between her legs, was a newly born infant, the umbilical cord and the afterbirth still attached. Belinda's eyes were wild with terror. The baby's eyes were closed, and it jerked its tiny arm and stopped moving. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," Daddy exclaimed under his breath, his feet hammered to the floor by astonishment. Mother's eyes rolled back into her head, and she folded at Daddy's feet as if her spinal cord turned to jelly. "Lenora!" "Take her to bed, Daddy," I said. "I'll see to Belinda." He gazed back at the sight once more to confirm it indeed had still been there and not his imagination. Then he squatted and slipped his arms under Mother and lifted her like she was a baby herself, carrying her back to the bedroom. I entered Belinda's room, quickly closing the door behind me. Our servants downstairs were surely awake by now as well. Belinda whimpered, her eyes rolled as if the room was spinning, and she had her arms raised, but was afraid to touch the infant or herself. "I couldn't stop it. It just happened, Olivia," she moaned. Her whole body shook. I stepped over to her and gazed down at the bloody sight. "You were pregnant? All this time you've been pregnant?" I said incredulously. "Yes," she said, gasping. Now everything made sense. A number of times during the past few months, Daddy and I had made comments about Belinda's gaining weight. She was ravenous about every meal lately and didn't seem all concerned about her widening hips and bloating face. I really didn't care. It was more Daddy who complained. His precious little Barbie doll was disappearing right before his eyes, and in its place grew this self-indulgent creature I called my sister. Oh, once or twice I said things like, "Aren't you afraid you'll lose your entourage of boyfriends?" She didn't seem concerned, even though it was true that fewer and fewer young men came around to visit her or ask her to go sailing, take walks on the beach, or spend an evening in town. Now that I stared down at her squirming on the bedroom floor, her child quiet and unmoving between her thighs, I realized why she had so adamantly kept me from seeing her naked a number of times. A quick search of her closet would result in the discovery of a pair of girdles in a box. What I also understood was the sudden and uncharacteristic interest and desire in those baggy dresses she used to refer as granny clothes whenever I wore them. I knelt beside her and put my hand on the infant's tiny chest. It felt cold already, and it didn't vibrate with a heartbeat. "I don't think it's alive," I said. She whimpered again. "Please, Olivia, get it away. I can't touch it," she said. I didn't move quickly. I stared at the wrinkled little creature for a while, studying its facial features, its blue lips, and its fingers so tiny, even one of my own small fingers was the width of nearly 5 of its hands. "It's a boy," I said, more of a thought, voiced out loud, than anything that she wanted to know. Belinda closed her eyes and began to hyperventilate. I watched her suffering for a moment, still dumbfounded at how well she kept this secret. What would our Daddy think of his precious little princess now, I wondered. "Do you have any idea, even an inkling of an idea, how terrible this is, Belinda? Don't you consider this inevitable outcome and think about what it's going to do to our parents? Why didn't you come forward earlier so Daddy could have done something about this instead of deceiving everyone and hiding your condition?" "I was afraid," she murmured and began to sniffle and sob. "I thought everyone would just hate me." "Oh, and now we just love you," I countered. She closed her eyes and held her breath for a moment. Please, Olivia, help me," she begged. "How many months were you pregnant?" I asked. "I don't know exactly, but at least 6 or 7, she said quickly. "That's why this child is so tiny. It's a premature birth." I knew you were having sex with some of your boyfriends, Belinda. I just knew it. I told you this would happen and I warned you. Now look. At what you've reaped with your wild, selfish behavior. She sobbed an apology. Right, I muttered. Well, I'll just blink and it'll be gone. Please, Olivia, who is the father? I demanded. She didn't reply. You've got to say, Olivia, whoever he is, he has at least half the responsibility. Daddy's going to want to know. Who is it? Arnold Miller? He was a boy she had seen with a great deal more than others. No, she said quickly. Arnold and I never went far enough. Then who was it, Belinda? I'm not going to play a guessing game with you. Tell me. If you don't tell me, I'll leave you here wallowing in this disaster. I don't know, she wailed. Please, Olivia, how can you not know? Unless you... My God, Belinda, how many boys have you slept with? And so closely together that you can't pinpoint who the father is of this child? At the moment, I didn't know what bothered me more, that she had so many lovers or that I had none. She shook her head. I don't know, Olivia, I don't know, and I don't blame anyone, please. You'll have to tell Daddy something, Belinda, I warned. He won't settle for an I don't know. She opened her eyes and gazed up at me, and for a moment I thought she was going to reveal the father of her baby. Was it someone I knew well, too? Well? I can't blame someone if I don't know for sure, she finally declared, can I? They're all to blame. You might as well name all of them and let each one sweat, I said, thinking that would be just a poetic revenge. I can't, she wailed. She shook her head so hard I thought she would tear it off her neck. All right, suit yourself. You'll see what's going to happen now. You'll see, I predicted. I rose and went to the bathroom to get some towels, and I returned and rolled the dead infant into one. I placed it and the afterbirth umbilical cord on the bed just as Daddy had opened the door and stepped back in the room. He looked around, his eyes avoiding Belinda for a moment. He gazed at the child before turning to me with a questioning look. He's dead, I think, Daddy, I said. He nodded. Most likely, he said as he approached the bed. He reached down slowly with his big hand and put the tip of his forefinger on the infant's neck. Yes, he said, a blessing. Belinda began to wail. Stop it, I snapped, hovering over her. Do you want Camillita to hear you and come running up here? Belinda muffled her sobs and turned over on her side. Can you get her cleaned up and back to bed, Daddy asked me. Yes, Daddy. Is she bleeding or anything? Are we going to need a doctor? I don't think so. Make sure. I'll be right back, he said. How's Mother? I have to calm her down a bit, but she's still trembling badly, he said sorrowfully. After I get Belinda into the bathtub, I'll look in on her, I promised. Good. He hurried out of the room. Get up, Belinda. I can't lift you and carry you into the bathroom. I'm going to run some water in your tub. At least cover yourself for now. You look absolutely disgusting, moaning and wallowing on the floor, I said. She whimpered her reply and started to brace herself on her elbows. There was blood on her legs, but she didn't look like to be bleeding anymore. She took deep breaths again and sighed so deeply I thought she'd passed out. Are you in any pain? I don't need a doctor, she said. I'll be all right. Maybe you don't need a doctor, but whether or not you'll be all right remains to be seen, I said. I glanced again at the dead infant. I couldn't make out the color of its few strands of hair because its head was covered with sticky blood. There was no way to study it and determine who the father could be, I thought, and went to the bathroom to run Belinda's tub. After I helped her get in, I heard Daddy return to the room. I went to the bathroom door and saw he had brought a small cupboard shoebox along. He glanced at me as he lifted the dead infant, wrapped it more tightly in a blanket, and then carefully, as if it was still alive, put it in the box. "We've got to clean this up ourselves," he said, nodding at the floor. "I don't want the servants knowing anything, Olivia." "I'll take care of it, Daddy." "How is she?" "She's all right. She'll live," I said sharply. He nodded again and lifted the box in his arms. "What are you going to do, Daddy?" He paused. "I'll have to bury the poor thing," he said. For a moment I just stood there staring at him, clutching the makeshift coffin in his arms. "Don't we have to report it to someone?" I asked. "If we do that, Olivia, this terrible event will be the headline news in every home and tavern in Providence Town. It would definitely do Belinda no good, and it would be very damaging to the family. Apparently she did a very good job of keeping this a secret from us, but questioning her vigorously and make sure that no one else knows about it," he asked. "Yes, Daddy. Don't forget, as soon as you finish with her, please look in on your mother." "I will, Daddy." He stared for a moment and then looked at the box in his arms. "It has to be this way," he concluded, more for himself than for me, I thought. He turned and hurried out of the bedroom with the box cradled securely in his arms. I returned to the tub and saw to it that Belinda washed herself. I helped her dry her body, then brought her a new, clean nightgown. After I got her into bed, I went downstairs to the utility room. I found I was tiptoeing and slinking around my own home, moving like a burglar to keep from waking Carmelita, our maid, and cook Jerome. I got a pail, a mop, rags, and some detergent. Then I returned to Belinda's room and filled the pail with hot water. Fortunately, she had lowered herself from the bed onto the throw rug, and the rug had absorbed most of the blood. I rolled up the rug, then washed away the traces of the horrendous event. Belinda lay there with her eyes closed, moaning softly, occasionally sobbing. As I worked, I rattled off a relentless series of complaints and chastisements. "You've really done it this time. Mother is beside herself. Daddy looked pale enough to be a corpse, too. We'll have nightmares forever. What did you think? It would all just go away without anyone knowing?" I paused and looked down at her wilting little face. "Did you think being pregnant was like having a cold or the measles? Maybe you've damaged yourself forever, Belinda. Maybe now you'll never be able to have a child decently. No one will want to marry you. What were you thinking?" I ranted. How could this be happening, I wondered? How could anyone, even Belinda, do such a thing to herself and her family? "Please, Olivia, please stop." She put her hands over her ears. "I'll stop. I should stop and let you clean up this mess," I muttered. "Does anyone else know about your being pregnant?" "You didn't tell any of your bubble-headed friends at school, did you?" I followed. Most of Belinda's friends were silly, spoiled girls. I called them the Bubblegum Club, because I thought their brains were full of bubbles. "No one knows anything," she swore. "I always got dressed and undressed in private when I took physical education class, and I never showered in the school." "You'd better be telling the truth," I warned her. I went to the bathroom and cleaned up the tub so Carmelita wouldn't find any traces of this tragedy. Daddy returned, his dark brown hair wild, his eyes full of torment and shock. He saw the rug and wet rags and picked everything up. "I'm going to bury all this too," he mumbled. "It must be that none of this ever happened." He looked about madly. "You've got everything, Daddy?" "Good," he said and charged out. I never seen our father look more crazed. It actually frightened me more than it frightened Belinda, who was lying there with her eyes closed most of the time. I imagine she was afraid to look at his face now. After Daddy left again, I went to see how Mother was doing. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, working up the strength to stand and see Belinda. She still looked quite pale, her breathing labored. "Mother, you should lie down again," I said, rushing up to her side. "How is Belinda?" "She'll be all right. I got her cleaned up and back to bed. And Daddy's taking care of the rest." "Taking care?" "The baby died right away, Mother," I said. "It was premature. Daddy took the baby and buried it someplace. He said he doesn't want anyone to know. Buried? She gasped and shook her head. God forgive us, she whispered. I thought she would fall forward to the floor, so I seized her by the elbow and tried to get her to lie back. But she shook her head. I have to look in on her, Olivia. She wobbled when she stood. I put my arm around her waist and helped her to the door. She grew stronger as she walked and returned to Belinda's bedroom. Belinda started to sob as Mother approached her. I'm sorry, Mommy, she whimpered. I'm sorry. Mother sat down on the bed and held her in her arms as Belinda cried. Mother rocked her. Poor child, she said. Poor child, she ought to be whipped, I muttered. But I couldn't help feeling sorry for her too, even though I didn't want to give her an iota of sympathy. There, dear, it's all right. It'll be all right, Mother chanted. Finally, Belinda sucked back her sniffles and wiped her cheeks. I know I should have told you, Mommy. I just couldn't. I was too ashamed and afraid, she explained. That made a bad thing worse, Belinda. You can't keep such a secret from your parents or your sister, she said, gazing at me. Belinda looked at me too. We all love you and would want to help you. I know, Mommy, I'm sorry, she said. How did such a thing happen? Mother asked in a hoarse whisper, looking more at me than at Belinda now. For as long as I could remember, Mother turned to me to learn things about Belinda. She always expected I was in charge of my younger sister, but I had been away at finishing school most of this year, and I knew nothing about Belinda's exploits, only through gossip and the little I observed on holidays. This was Belinda's senior year, and I thought she had been given too much freedom, much more than I had been given. Without me at home, Mother didn't keep a good account of Belinda's whereabouts and activities. She was permitted to sleep at her friend's home and stay out well past midnight. Daddy was always too busy to notice, I thought. And now look at what had resulted. She says she doesn't know who the father is, I declared. Apparently there's too many candidates. What? Mother asked, her face twisted in disbelief. Did she think Belinda was some sort of angel just because Daddy always treated her like his little cherub? Too many? How can there have been too many, Belinda? I don't know, Mommy, please. I don't want to think about it, please. She begged and started to sob again. We should know, I insisted. Daddy should know and go see them. Maybe it's better we don't, Mother concluded, succumbing to Belinda's tiny, teary grimaces and wails. What good is it going to do now? People should be responsible for their actions, Mother. Daddy's going to want to know, I added firmly. I'm thirsty, Belinda moaned. All right, honey, all right. Olivia, will you get some water? I need something colder, something with ice, she demanded. So go get it, I snapped. Olivia, please, Mother said, turning her soft eyes to me. We shouldn't be babying her now, Mother. She's done a terrible thing to all of us, I said, feeling abused too. Mother just held her and gazed her pleading eyes at me. I turned and hurried out of the room and down the stairs. Carmelita had finally been roused by the sound of the footsteps in the stairway and activity above. She was a tall, very dark-skinned, half Portuguese, half Negro woman, what we called a brava on the Cape, and she had been working for our family for the last 10 years. She was in her mid-40s, lean, with a narrow face and eyes the color of obsidian. Carmelita was the perfect maid and cook for our family because she was strong, efficient, and discreet. She seemed to have no opinions about us and kept to herself when she wasn't working. Her licorice black hair was down to her shoulders. When she emerged from her quarters to greet me, she was in her nightgown and robe. Is someone sick? She asked. Belinda, I said. Oh, is there anything I can do? No, thank you, Carmelita, I said. I can take care of it, I said firmly. She fixed those dark eyes on my face for a moment, and expressionless nodded and returned to her maid's quarters at the rear of the house. I knew she didn't believe me, but even when I was just a young girl, Carmelita never challenged anything I told her. When I was in the kitchen getting Belinda's drink, Daddy came in through the rear of the house, from the door off the pantry. He stood there a moment, his face streaked with sweat, his hands caked with dirt. "It's done," he said. "How's it up there?" he asked, his eyes shifting toward the ceiling. "Mother's with her. I'm just getting her a cold drink." Daddy nodded and looked at his smudged wrists and hands before looking back at me. "You understand why I'm doing this, don't you, Olivia? The bottom line is it's the best way to protect the family." "I understand, Daddy." "She told you no one else knows about this." "That's what she said," I replied, not without a smirk of skepticism that Daddy chose to ignore. "Good," he said, "good. She won't tell me who the father is. However," I added, "she claims she doesn't know." He shook his head. "Maybe it's better. We can't go accusing someone and stir up a nest of hornets. Whoever it is, he shouldn't get away with it, Daddy." "It's done and over," he said. "Let it all be buried," he added, and left to wash before returning to see Belinda. Once again, I thought my spoiled sister gets away with something terrible. When I returned to Belinda's room with her water, I found Mother and her lying back comfortably. I gave her the cold drink, and she sipped it and smiled at me. "Thank you, Olivia. I'm sorry I put you through so much." "Yes, you did," I said without flinching. She looked like she would burst into tears again and make Mother feel more terrible. "Just rest now, Belinda. You don't want to get seriously ill," I added mercifully. She changed her expression instantly to one of gratitude and reached out to take my hand. "You're my best sister," she said. I nearly laughed. "I'm your only sister, Belinda." "I know, but you're so good to me." "She is good to you. She's good to all of us," Mother said, smiling at me. What we all have to do now is get some rest." "How can anyone sleep after this?" I muttered. If Mother heard, she chose to ignore me. Daddy came to the door and looked in on us. "Well?" he asked. "She's doing fine, Winston," Mother said. "That's good. It's better we all behave as if this didn't happen," he advised. "You might as well pretend there's no ocean out there," I declared. "Your father is right, Olivia. It won't do any good to talk about it, even amongst ourselves. Let's close our eyes and imagine it was a nightmare," she suggested. It didn't surprise me to hear her say such a thing. It was the way Mother handled most of the unpleasantness in her life. Not even an event like this would be any different. She leaned over to kiss Belinda, who smiled at her, and then she left the room. Daddy stood there a moment, gazing in at me, at the floor, and then at Belinda. "Everyone just go to sleep," he said, and left. I looked at Belinda. She offered me her small smile, but I just shook my head after her. "I'm so tired, Olivia," she said. "I feel weak inside too, but I didn't want to alarm anyone. Daddy wouldn't have wanted me to go to a doctor." "You'll live," I said. "Just go to sleep." I checked the room once more and then started out, pausing at the doorway to look back at her. She looked small, like a little girl again. In moments she was asleep. I lie awake in my bed, thinking not of Belinda or of my parents. I thought about that dead infant whose spark of life went out so quickly and who was interred someplace in our grounds too soon afterward. He surely had no memory of ever being born into this family. At the moment, I thought he was the lucky one. Belinda remained at home for the rest of the week. We told everyone she had the flu. I thought that Carmelita knew something far more serious had occurred. She brought Belinda her meals, so she saw that Belinda wasn't coughing or sneezing. However, Mother pampered her and behaved as if our lies were really truth. I heard her talking to her friends on the telephone, telling them how sick Belinda was. One day she was fine, and the next she was as sick as a dog, she rambled, describing the symptoms, even claiming she'd called the doctor for instructions. It all disgusted me. I was especially amazed at how quickly Daddy had adjusted to the facade he and Mother had created. The following morning he was up and dressed as usual, already seated at the breakfast table, reading his newspaper, as though the night before really had just been a bad dream. The only indication on his face was his quick but sharp look at me when Carmelita came into the dining room and inquired about Belinda's health. That was when Mother went into her long, detailed explanation, pouring out her brook of bubbling white lies. Daddy looked pleased. Since I had returned from finishing school, I had gone to work for him as an apprentice accountant. Daddy decided it would be a waste to send me to some liberal arts college just to fill in the time. Until you find a decent and proper man to marry, Olivia, any man you marry will appreciate you more for doing something practical, he added. I wasn't excited about going to college anyway, and I had always been good with numbers. Daddy claimed I had a good mind for business. He said he knew that even when I was just a little girl selling cranberries from our bog, I set up a stand on the street that ran by our property. Tourists thought it was sweet seeing a little girl behave so seriously about money. What impressed Daddy was that I took the money and had him put it into an interest-bearing savings account rather than spend it in candy or toy stores. At least I have someone in the family to inherit my business, he declared. He had come to accept that he wouldn't have a son, but in time, I believed he no longer thought of me as inferior substitute. He gave me too many compliments at the office for me to believe that. Daddy was truly a self-made millionaire, a success story that illustrated the American dream, a small entrepreneur who made a good business decision and gradually but firmly built a bigger and bigger business. He was written about in many regional magazines and once in the Boston papers. He had begun with a single fishing boat and then bought a second and a third, and before long he had a fleet of vessels providing seafood for every growing national market. He expanded into canning of shrimp in Boston and built an impressive financial chain of related businesses, making the shrewd move to get a commanding interest in the trucking facility so he could control his overhead. By his own admission, he was at times a ruthless businessman, smothering competition, dropping prices to drive them out of his territories. He became more and more influential in politics and picked up government contracts and continued to expand his reach and hold on his markets. After less than 6 months, I knew our mother company inside and out, and Daddy even permitted me to sit in on some of his business meetings and listen and learn more. After they ended, he often turned to me to get my opinions, and a number of times he took my advice. Belinda, on the other hand, didn't know the first thing about our business. According to the way she behaved and thought, money came into our lives like rain. When we needed it, it was there. And when there was a drought, it never came in time. And it came never a time when she heard the words, "We can't afford that, Belinda." I often lectured her about being ungrateful and unappreciative. "You take everything for granted as though it was owed to you," I accused. She gave me that sweet smile of hers and shrugged. I could accuse her of murder and she would do the same. She rarely argued or denied anything. It was as if she believed she would be immune to the responsibility and guilt. and she'd be given some holy dispensation and could do whatever her little heart desired, no matter what the consequences. It was even true now, I thought disgustedly, with our parents claiming it was better to protect like nothing happened. Belinda just had the flu. I almost believed Daddy had convinced himself and he hadn't buried a premature infant. The day after, when I returned home from the office, I wandered out behind our house, curious to whether I could find the unmarked gravesite. Our land behind the house ran nearly a full acre before it reached the cliff that looked out over the Atlantic Ocean. It was a sharp descent to the rocky beach below, and there were some safe pathways that led down to the small private beach that we had, only a clamshell's toss away. Our yard had sprawling maples and some oak trees, and a large part of it remained uncultivated. Poison ivy grew among the brambles and wild roses, and more than once Belinda had wandered too close, suffering the results for weeks after. Sometimes I would walk to the edge of the cliff and watch the tide, mesmerized by the rhythmic movements of the waves and breakers and the sprays shooting up from the rocks. I could feel my body sway as if it was tempted to fly off the cliff and crash to the rocks below. When she was younger, Belinda was frightened by the ocean. She's not fond of sailing and hated the danger of man-of-wars and the smell of seaweed. She rarely, if ever, went hunting for driftwood. The only reason she could see for going to the beach was to have a party and then stay far enough from the water so as not even to be sprayed by it. Once when I was 9 and she was 7, I took her out to the edge of the cliff with me and asked her to close her eyes. It frightened her so much that she turned and ran back to the house. I thought about that now and wondered what I would have done if she would have fallen. Jerome had just finished doing some weeding when I stepped out back to find the grave. He nodded and headed for the shed. With my arms folded across my body, I walked as casually as I could down the slate rock pathway, my eyes flitting from side to side, searching for signs of dirt that had been disturbed. I walked all the way out to the edge of the cliff without seeing anything. Where could Daddy have put in that carton and the other things? It wouldn't be just a little hole, would it? I went around towards the maples and paused when I thought I found an area under one of the trees that looked like it had been dug up. I stepped closer, and when I knelt and inspected the ground, I decided this was the place. It put a shudder in me, and I rose and expected the dead infant to cry for help, even with its muted voice. Years later, I would come here again and find the place overgrown, but in the midst of the crabgrass and flat emerald weeds would a patch of juniper swaying in the ocean wind, reminding me of that horrible night. At that moment, I was angry about it, and I didn't like feeling creepy and morose. I didn't like burying Belinda's sins because I didn't like lies. When you lie, I thought, you make yourself vulnerable and weak. Daddy was a much weaker man in my eyes because of what he'd done, though I was sure he had his nightmares too. I fled from the spot, hating Belinda for putting us in this horrible place. Daddy should have made Belinda suffer the consequences and not leave her pampered upstairs all week, I thought. I believed he would never bring it up again, but he surprised me one night toward the end of that week. He was in the den going over the family accounts when I walked by, and he called me. "Close the door, Olivia," he ordered. I did and turned to him. He sat behind his desk. "I noticed you've been different all this week." "I don't mean to be your conscience, Daddy," I said. He winced as though I'd spit at him. I'm sorry. It's just hard for me to pretend like nothing happened. Listen to me, Olivia. The most important quality is loyalty. Every family is a world unto itself, and every member of that little world must protect it at any cost. Only then can individual liberty, interests, and talents be pursued. Build the family first, Olivia. The only rule for morality and what's good for the family. I stared a moment. Daddy looked like he was about to cry now. His lips were pressed together so hard his cheeks pulled. Don't condemn me for loving all of you, loving my family, name, and reputation so much, Olivia. Learn from it, he pleaded. I took a deep breath. Daddy and I had many conversations in the past, but I rarely saw his eyes filled with tears. I understand, Daddy, I really do. That's good, Olivia, because you're my hope. You'll have to make the decisions to make for our family after I'm gone, and I hope you'll always remember this week and remember what I told you to use as your guiding principle. I will, Daddy, I promised. He smiled and rose, and then walked back to his desk. I'm proud of you, Olivia. He kissed me on the forehead. Very proud, he said. I watched him return to his desk. His words clung to me even after I had put the lights out that night and lowered my head to the pillow. They lingered with the memory of his tear-filled eyes. There is a terrible price to pay for being a leader, I thought. Terrible burden. Maybe Olinda was better off than any of us, especially me. Look at what she'd done, and yet tonight, like most nights, she embraced her stuffed animals, closed her eyes, and dreamed of parties, of tinkling bells, of ribbons and music and boyfriends dangling on her smiles, whereas my dreams were about the patch of dirt behind the house and my father lowering the carton into the ground while through his tears he chanted, "For the family, it's all for the family."